Hello, First Lutheran family. This is Pastor Phil coming to you with this installment of our Faith Time ministry. Please have the 27th on your calendar. That's 3 weeks from this Sunday. We've got Super Bowl Sunday, one Sunday in between, and then the 27th. That's when we're going to have our in-person gathering for our Faith Time ministry. If you haven't had a chance to watch the videos, all the videos, or just come, it doesn't matter. You'll be a great part of the conversation. We've been having a wonderful time getting to know each other at these gatherings. And now that the COVID numbers are going down in our city and in our nation, we're looking forward to expanding this ministry and getting more and more people around the table to continue to fellowship, get to know each other, and study God's Word. I really hope that you will participate in this with us. Please have the 27th on your calendar to get together. Last week, we talked about how Jesus came saying that he hasn't come to abolish the law and the prophets. He's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. He's not coming to start a new faith. He is the fulfillment. He is the Messiah of the Jewish faith come to fulfill all those things that had been prophesied about what God was going to do. And he talked about how our righteousness needs to exceed that of the scribes and the Pharisees. The scribes knew the law but weren't doing it. The Pharisees were doing the law, but they were focusing not on the heart of it, but on the outward performance of ceremony. And Jesus says both of these things are missing the boat. We need to know the law and do it, and we need to focus on the heart of the law, which is to love God and love neighbor, and in all those ways that manifests itself. And so in today's verses, he's going to get into what that looks like. What does it mean to focus on the right part of the law and to live that out? And so it actually is a lot of practical things about how we actually live our lives, but the line is drawn to those things are the manifestations of our inward life. We're going to see this really clearly with today's verse, which is anger, about anger and how we need to deal with anger, and that affects how we live out our life practically. But in the next few weeks, we're going to get to talk about, anger, adultery, divorce, oaths, retaliation, enemies, all these things that are very interesting and very practical things to do with life, but that um, uh, but those realities are created from our inward life and formed by our inward life. All right, so we're going to see how that works. So today about anger. Just before we jump into the verses, just a personal anecdote. I grew up in the Mississippi Delta on 175 acres that my grandfather had bought when he came back from military service. It was a great childhood. I wouldn't complain about much at all. My mother had divorced when I was very young and moved back to the land, and so it was me and my mother lived in one mobile home, and in the next door mobile home was my grandparents and one of my uncles, my younger uncle. And then there was actually an old house on the other side of our trailer that my great grandfather had lived in for a while, but he had passed away by the time I came along. So three children, my grandparents is three children, and then me. And so it was a wonderful upbringing. Had lots of room to run around. Always had lots of dogs around to take out on the land and just explore, and it was wonderful. But one of the things I was aware of, growing up, and even with the hindsight of being an adult, I see some more details about it, was, every family has issues. Every family has problems. And one of the problems that existed in our family was anxiety and anger. My grandmother, my grandfather, and one of my uncles in particular really had that as an issue that they didn't deal with, and it affected our family life in different ways. There was never any physical violence, and so lots of people have it way worse than I do. So once again, I'm not complaining, just noticing a reality. But there were those days when someone was upset, and so the rest of the family knew this was a day you didn't say anything, or you found somewhere else to be. It was kind of like what they say, walking on eggshells. It was one of those situations because you knew there'd be yelling, there'd be things like that. Never any physical violence, but so you can see how that affects a person as a child. One of the things we learn as in family systems and therapy and counseling is that oftentimes we're either an extension of or a reaction against our family of origin. Now that's way too clear cut. Obviously, we are always both an extension of and a reaction against where we come from. It's a mixed bag, but you can kind of see how that plays out. And for me, I know I witnessed at a very early age how crippling anger can be in a person's life. Anger can steal whole days, whole weeks from a person's life. And you know that to be the case. You know something's happened in your life, and it's happened in mine too. I certainly am not perfect in this. But, you wake up stewing about something. You stew about it all the way to work. You stew about it at work. You go to lunch, you stew about it. You get to the end of the day, and you realize that your whole day was eaten up by this anger and what you've connected to this event, whatever it was that set you off. And, 2 weeks down the road, you may still have negative feelings for it, but that anger subsides. It goes away. It's so temporary, unless you make the decision to keep bringing it up for yourself and keep stewing about it, which some people do. But I have many faults, many faults. But one of the things that did help me early on is to see how bad that can be, and to sort of make the conscious decision to not be an angry person and to not be a combative, fearful person. And I will say, too, that it's interesting to see how fear, anxiety, and anger all so often come together. What is it that Yoda says? He says something like, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate is the path to, I may have gotten that wrong, path to the dark side. I may have gotten those in the wrong order. Point is, though, those things dovetail around each other. A fearful person is going to go to anger so much quicker. If you feel insecurity and anxiety and anger, all those things go so much together. And it's the good thing about that is, from a counseling, therapy, faith point of view, is that when you deal with one of those things, it helps the rest of them. If you can help a person feel more secure, they're going to feel less angry. If you can decrease a person's anxiety, it's going to help in all those other aspects too. So looking back on my family of origin, I see all that happening, and I'm thankful, in a way that I was able to see what that looked like and to steer away from it. Steer away from cultivating a life of anger. That's not to say I don't get angry. Everyone does, but seeing that at an early age helped me to steer away from it, I think. And I think we, no matter how old we are, we can still do that. We can still cultivate lives of peace. We can still cultivate lives that anger has a small part in. And it has to do with forgiving other people, forgiving ourselves, feeling secure in who we are, and all those things dovetail together to help anger be a lesser part of our lives. Let's see what Jesus has to say about it. He begins in verse 21. You've heard it said to those of ancient times. Now, when Jesus says that, he's usually talking about the Torah, the law. So he's going back to the original law. You shall not murder. So that's one of the big 10 commandments that we talk about in confirmation, right? You shall not murder. And whoever murders shall be liable to judgment. But I say to you, all right, so here is one of the big central aspects of the Sermon on the Mount, is some scholars call it Jesus' intensification of the law. So you've heard it said by men of old, don't murder, but I say to you, if you're angry with a brother or sister, you'll be liable for judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you'll be liable to the council. And if you say, you fool, you will be liable to the hell of fire. Wow, okay. So it's an intensification of the law. Now, I would argue it's also an internalization of the law. And maybe it's intensified by being internalized. But what do I mean by that? Well, if all I had was the commandment to not murder, that means I could walk around wishing I could kill you all day long, and just if I don't do it, I've still followed the law. I've made this point in adult Sunday school a few times, and it's a very kind of Lutheran point too, but I won't get into that this time. But that, law says don't murder, so As long as I don't do that, I'm in the clear. So I can walk around hating you, hating that anything good happens to you, wishing that you would have calamity happen to you, wishing to God that I could murder you. But as long as I don't, I'm in the clear. I've followed the law. Jesus says that's not enough. Now, obviously, we kind of know that, and I'm being kind of flippant about it. But it's a very important point when you think about it, because all violence comes from the heart. So it's an intensification, and it's also an internalization. If I say to myself, I can't be angry with my brother, or I shouldn't, or I need to school myself away from anger, then of course I'm schooling myself away from murder, right? Of course I am. So if you're angry with a brother, you will be liable for judgment. If you insult a brother, you'll be liable to the council. If you say you fool, you will be liable to the hell of fire. So that's very much putting forth a very strict idea of living out love in a concrete way by marshaling our language, by saying to ourselves, what I even say to my brother and sister, God cares about that. It's not just that I don't kill them, also how I speak to them, God cares about. Here's something that's very interesting as he continues. So when you're offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go first be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Wow. All right. So offering gifts at the temple, that's one of those things in the Torah too, something that is so, so very important. A huge part of the living out of the life of faith. Jesus once again intensifies this commandment about murder to say that's more important than offering your gift. There are so many verses about how to offer the gifts, when to offer the gifts, why to offer the gifts, burnt offerings, blood offerings, all these kind of gifts at the temple. And Jesus says, if you remember that you have broken a relationship and it's your fault, that's more important in God's eyes than doing that gift at the temple. Now that is both fascinating and scary, isn't it? Because it is very easy to damage our relationships. Anger happens, insecurity happens. But rather than that feed into our anxiety, it helps us to focus on the right things. Our calling is not to just observe outward. Like, I'm going to give my money at the church. I'm going to go to church. I'd love for you to come to church, but I'm going to do all these things, and then I'm still going to hate everybody. I'm still going to have bitterness. I'm still going to wish I could kill you if you do something wrong to me. That's all missing the boat. Be reconciled first. Don't have anger. Allow your internal life to be formed by the word, so that the outward things you do are a reflection of your inward life. Cultivate peace, and peace happens. Cultivate anger, and there's no telling what'll happen. Violence, all kinds of things that'll hurt you. So that is just a few words about what Jesus says about anger, and next time we'll get into adultery, which it's fascinating to see how this passage on anger and the passage on adultery are so very similar in that they're both an intensification and an internalization of what the law says to do. So we'll talk about that next time. Hey, thanks for listening. We will see you in church, and especially on the 27th for our meal and discussion. God bless you and your family.